with Brexit on the horizon and our trade deal with the EU still unclear. Joining me to discuss this is Jonathan Isserby, the editor of Brexit Central, and Andrew Pendleton, Director of Policy at the New Economics Foundation. Hello to you, gentlemen. Thank you both for joining us. Jonathan, to you first of all, make your case.
Well, frankly, I don't think Brexit has a huge amount to deal with this question. I think this is an issue that politicians have been prevaricating over for over a decade, and about time they made a decision on it. I think whether we were staying in the European Union or indeed leaving the European Union, I think the decision to expand Heathrow was absolutely vital for the nation's economy and for its economic health. But dare I say it, in the post-Brexit scenario, it is a very important sign that global Britain is indeed fully open for business.
Andrew?
Well, it would be great if it was true, but unfortunately MPs have been right to prevaricate over Heathrow because over time the supposed benefits that were presented by the Airports Commission, for instance, 3 years ago, have fallen and fallen, and now if you apply the government's own rules to evaluating big transport projects like Heathrow, you would value it as low or poor value for money. And one of the biggest problems with Heathrow is that it concentrates aviation in London and the South East for the next generation, which means that if you're in Sheffield or Edinburgh or Glasgow or Exeter, then the chances of you being able to fly where you want to cheaply direct from your local airport are diminished by the building of Heathrow or the expansion of Heathrow.
Jonathan?
I think it's really important that people are able to get from those regional airports to destinations around the world, and having that extra runway at Heathrow will improve the capacity and ability to do that, because Heathrow has been at capacity for some time, and you may have got extra international routes added in recent years, but actually sometimes at the expense of some of those internal routes to British regional airports. And Andrew complains about this particular expansion. I mean, he's got quite a record of campaigning against aviation generally, and I'm not sure if there were a proposal to expand aviation capacity anywhere in the UK that he'd support it.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about that, Jonathan, because of course if MPs vote in favour of Heathrow tonight, then overnight it will turn the airport into the biggest single emitter, or give it permission to become the biggest single emitter of carbon dioxide in the UK, and it will become, the biggest focus for environmental protest in the country. And I think that's legitimate because we do have to take climate change seriously. We have legally binding climate change targets in the UK. We can expand aviation, we can expand the number of flights people take to a certain extent up to a certain time. And it's best to distribute those fairly. So again, the point here is, if you want a balanced economy, if you want an economy that's fair, and if you want an economy that's fair for the planet, then expanding Heathrow is the very worst step you can take.
Jonathan?
Look, I say Andrew works for the New Economics Foundation, who are anti-globalisation. They believe there's a limit to the amount of growth there can be in the economy. And if we were to take their position on this, we would cede our position in the global race to other countries which are willing to expand their airports. Over recent years, you've seen airports like Schiphol, Frankfurt, Charles de Gaulle in continental Europe expanding their passenger numbers at a faster rate than Heathrow is, which means that the UK is losing out. And in order to be at the forefront of the global economy and that global race, we do need to be expanding Heathrow. And the government have been very clear about strict environmental limits and legally binding limits that they're going to put on pollution, on noise and night flights and so on. The government have been very clear that there have to be reasonable limits on all of that. But at the same time, this decision has to be taken. It's taken far too long to make it, in my view. Finally, that is being made today, although obviously it's going to take a very long time before we actually see the fifth runway physically at Heathrow down the line. OK,
you said fifth runway then. I think that was probably a slip of the tongue. Andrew?
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, as the World Cup has been showing us, if you don't have the wherewithal to play the ball, you play the man. So I'll take all that on the chin. The point is that Heathrow is poor value for money.
No, don't just take it on the chin and try to counter what he was saying to you.
Well, if you want to rebalance the economy, so the point is, well, just for the record, the New Economics Foundation is not against growth. Growth is really important for people, it's important for jobs, but the point is growth of what? So growing the number of flights that we become dependent on in order to trade and make a living is really unwise, because in the future, our innovation has to take us towards a low-carbon economy. Otherwise, the impacts of climate change are going to mean, as the Stern Review said 10 years ago, they're going to mean that we aren't in a position to produce anything, really, that our economy is going to take a massive hit. So actually, avoiding locking ourselves into a pattern of growing aviation and looking at the goods and services that we need to produce across our whole economy, and that's not just in London and the South East, is a really critical thing and a really critical aim for MPs. I really hope MPs turn this down tonight, because if they vote in favour of this, they're voting in favour of an economy that's hugely unfair, that's still massively concentrated in London and the South East, and one that is not going to get us to our environmental targets.
Jonathan, low carbon economy, and why concentrate on the South East?
We live in a more globally connected world than ever before, and we need to have the ability to connect with those places, both for passengers and indeed for freight. And expanding Heathrow is an absolutely essential part of that. And I return to my point I made earlier, that Andrew, I think, would oppose aviation expansion anywhere in the UK. No, it's not simply about the Heathrow expansion. I think any attempt to increase the number of flights being taken from the UK, he would be opposed to. But what we've got here is the government finally taking a decision that will be of benefit to the UK and to British people as part of this global race.
I go broadly with what the government advisors tell us, the Committee on Climate Change, in terms of how much aviation can grow to keep us within our climate change targets. And they say that it can grow to a certain extent. So who gets the benefits of that? Well, if Heathrow is expanded, it's people in London and the South East, and actually, according to a new report that was published over the weekend, it's mostly relatively well-off people who already fly a lot that will capture most of those benefits, most of those new opportunities to fly from Heathrow. Whereas if we let...
But isn't, let me just interrupt you there. Let me just interrupt you there, Andrew. I mean, is Heathrow not a freight hub?
Heathrow is a big carrier of freight, that's true. But the volume of freight carried from Heathrow has not expanded for a decade or so now. The value
because there hasn't been the capacity to do so. That's why we need to expand the airport.
No, the value has, and what that points to is the different kinds of things we're exporting, because things are being miniaturized, as we know. Devices are getting smaller and smaller. So the volume of stuff is not the same as the value. The value is going up, the volume is staying broadly the same. But the point's the same. If you want to export and you're in Exeter or you're in Manchester or Leeds or Glasgow, you don't want to have to hawk stuff down to Heathrow to shove it on a plane here. You want to be able to do it from your nearest port of exit. And,
yeah, except those ports can't take the A380 and the like, I suppose, and the 747 playing to your argument about being carbon neutral and the amount of fuel that they use. You know, they're trying to get rid of those aeroplanes. I suppose might be an argument. I don't know, Jonathan.
Well, airports are getting, but airplanes are getting wider-bodied in general, and you know, so the 787, for instance, is a wide-bodied aircraft that has more hold capacity than its predecessors. So, you know, that
not more than the 74. But Jonathan, you were saying.
No, I say, look, you know, Heathrow has been at capacity for quite a long time, and what we are seeing is that rival airports in continental Europe are seeing passenger numbers and freight numbers expanding at a faster rate than Heathrow is able to, and we need to be able to compete with those. It's an essential part of the country being able to grow.
Okay, final word, Jonathan.
Oh, well, I thought that was my final word.
I'm sorry, Andrew. Forgive me, I was mixing you up. I do beg your pardon. Andrew, sorry.
Thank you. The fundamental point is the same, which is if you want to lock us into a model of aviation growth that means that the people who are already pretty well off and fly quite often in the South East capture all the benefits, then that's Heathrow expansion. Actually, if you want to rebalance the economy and rebalance from the wealthier people in the economy to those that are less well off, then don't expand Heathrow, because that's a really bad way to start.
Thank you so much. I'm sure